Hello. Today we're factoring perfect square trinomials and difference of squares. And so that's what our I can statement is, or our essential learning goal. So what I want to remind you of is we did difference of squares about a month ago, and it was the opposite of what we're doing now. We were given the factors. We wrote them on the outside of the box, we multiplied them together, and then that's how we got the x squared. We got a minus 2x, a plus 2x, and a minus 4. But what I want you to recognize today is this part. Oops, this should be a plus 4 down here. Oh, nope, it should be a minus. Is that these two terms right here, and I think you remember, they cancel each other out. So like if you are going to do the box method on this, this is a 0x that's in the middle. And the factor, the whole quadratic that we get out of it, is just this x squared minus 4. So today's assignment is you'll see a lot of these perfect squares of x squared minus 4. And it's called difference of squares because of this minus in between. So here's like a couple of examples that might even be in your homework or on the quiz. So what I want you to see is this is a perfect square and this is a perfect square, and it's a difference of perfect squares. So we can take the square root of x squared, which is x, and we can take the square root of 9, which is 3. And then what happens with our factors, they're almost the same, but one has to be a positive and one has to be a negative so that it equals this 0x in between, so that they get canceled out there. You can still do like the box or the x method. I'm going to do the x method on this one. And if I do the x, 0 goes on the top. That's your b, because notice, we don't have a b. We have an a and a c, which is 1 times 100. So that goes down here. The only way that we can get multiply to get 100 and add them to get a 0 is if they're complete opposites. And that's what's nice about the perfect squares. One has to be a positive 10 and one has to be a negative. So the factors of this one would be x minus 10 and x plus 10. The last one is a little bit different because you'll notice this a term is not 1. It's 16. But you have to start noticing your perfect squares. And 16 is a perfect square. And the square root of 16, x squared, will be 4x if I square root it. And the square root of 81 is 9. And the only way that I can get it so there's no middle term, that middle term is 0, is if one is a plus and one is a minus. And that's your difference of squares. Your factors, so these are your answers down here. Here, here, and here. Now we have perfect square trinomials, which are similar but just a smidge different. The difference is that they both have the same sign. So notice this has both minuses and this has both pluses. And so what happens to that middle term is doubled. This middle term is doubled. So when we get to these, again, these might be problems that are on your assignment. You can notice this pattern and know it right away, or you can do your x method or your box method. Remember, the b goes here, and your AC goes on the bottom, and I need two numbers that multiply to equal 36, and add or subtract to equal 12. Well, you'll notice that it's going to be 6 and 6. If I take the square root of 36, that's 6. And if I add 6 to 6, that doubles to make it 12. So the factors of this polynomial will be x plus 6 and x plus 6. On the next one, I just thought I'd do the box so you could see it. X squared minus 14x plus 49. And so when you go to factor, I need these two to be the same. They're both going to be that 7x, because I noticed that 49, the only factors of 49 are 1 and 49 and 7 and 7. And that's how I can get that to be that negative 14 there in the middle, is if they're both negative. So my factors for this one are x minus 7 and x minus 7. Now, I can write them separate like I did here, or you can also write it as x minus 7 quantity squared, because that's what that little 2 means. You have two of the same. Now, I don't know if all of you will get this one, but what makes this last one a little more difficult is that it's these are both perfect squares again, so that's why it's a perfect square trinomial, but your a is not 1. And right now, if you have, I think it's easier if you do, anytime that a is not 1, if you do it in the box for the time being. But I want you to notice 4x squared is perfect square, so that means the square root of that is 2x and 2x. And then 1 is also a perfect square, and the square root of 1 is 1 and 1. Now if I multiply them like we did last unit, 2x and 1 is a 2x, and then this 2x and this 1 is a 2x. And I need that middle term to be a minus 4x, and the only way it can be a minus is if both of these are negative. So then it's doubled again. And so this one is a negative, and our factors are 2x minus 1 and 2x minus 1. The last thing, there's only a couple on here, is we can't forget GCF. And GCF is what we're going to look for on these. So you'll notice here, this is even and 8 is even. So the GCF in this first term is 2. So that means I'm going to divide both terms by 2. So I keep the 2 out in front, and this is kind of like what we did last week. I have 2 times x squared minus 4, and that was our very first example, x squared minus 4. So hopefully you remember that that is x plus 2 and x minus 2, because there's no middle term, and those opposites cancel each other out. The second one, there are GCF. This time, notice how this is 5, and this ends with 5. So I'm guessing my GCF will be 5. So I'll divide each term by 5, and I'm left with x squared minus 9y squared. These are both perfect squares. It's a difference. So then I know that I'm going to have a 5 out in front. The square root of x squared is x. The square root of 9y is, 3y. So I have 5 times x minus 3y and x plus 3y. And the last one, the GCF here, if you don't know, like I'm looking at 162, and I don't know what goes into 162, but I'm thinking that maybe that 18 does. So I checked that in my calculator, and I looked to see, and I did 162 divided by 18, and sure enough, it equals 9. So 18 will be the GCF, and I'll divide each term by 18. So I'm left with 9x squared minus 1. And a lot of kids forget the 1 is a perfect square. And so your factors here are 18 goes in front. The square root of 9x squared is 3x, and the square root of 1 is 1. So 1 will be a plus and 1 will be a minus, so that they cancel each other out. Okay? Good luck on the assignment today. Let me know if you have questions.